ladies and gentlemen, to the next session of Outlook Business Advantage India Chemical Summit. I have with me Joseph K. Oommen, Managing Director, India, DuPont Sustainable Solutions, to talk about building a safety culture. I also have with me Hardik Joshipura to co-moderate this discussion. Over to you, Hardik.
Okay, so let me start, Joseph, with my favorite quote from Dr. Peter Drucker, who is a management guru, and he said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And when he meant that, when he said about this, I think he meant mainly from the softer culture of the organizations. But if I would like to add here, add the safety culture, especially when you link this to a specialty chemical industries. So my first question to you is, what are your broader views from the DuPont Safety Solutions perspective about culture of safety, especially in the Indian specialty chemical sector, especially in India?
Thank you, Mr. Hardik. So it's a very good question related to not just specialty chemicals, but I would say all industries in India.
Right.
Because if you look at the last few months, the nature of incidents happening in India, I would say all of that is preventable, provided leadership, people have behaved or provided the right infrastructure, the engineering required for these facilities. So it all starts with the safety culture of the organization. Right. They determine the end results, whether people are working safely, whether plants are being operated safely. So the first thing I would say about safety culture is it starts with leadership commitment. Mm-hmm. Whether the owners or the stakeholders of this company have value for safety. Are they committed to make their plants operate safely? And also the people are equipped to provide and work safely. This is the number one starting point, that they provide the infrastructure, the people, the management system, the procedures and the guidelines to operate their plants safely. Right. Then comes the part about people, whether the people are trained, whether the people have the right skill set. So I usually use 3 factors to determine, whether the safety, how the person working safely. Number 1, I would say is, I know I can and I will. Okay. So to the question whether, what is the DSS view on safety culture in an Indian industry, I think it applies for all industries, whether it take you specialty chemicals, pharma, in steel, whatever the industry is. Right. The safety culture should be an integral part of the leadership management system. The first thing I would look at starts with the leadership commitment. Whether the stakeholders and the leaders of the organization are committed to providing the safety governance system, the risk management system in place. Number 2 is whether I have been trained, I have been equipped to do my job safely. And number 3 is, every day when I come to the work, I say I will follow all procedures, I will do what is expected of me to operate safely. And hence, when every single person does it in the I will stage, then you have a culture, which what you call as to ensure that it is a safe operation. So in DSS, we typically, if you go to our website, you will see, which is commonly known as DSS Bradley curve, where on the y-axis is the incident rate. Right. So typically, you find people are in the reactive culture unfortunately in our country. Ye hota hai, incidents will happen.
That's right.
Right. Versus on the other end is, yes, it is preventable, and we as a management and we as a team are going to ensure that we will work safely to prevent all injuries in this site, all incidents in this site. And that is what I would say is the important part of a safety culture, to transform an organization from a reactive stage to a belief, collectively, we are a safe operation because we individually are committed to safety.
Absolutely. Maybe one question which occurred to me, Joseph, is when you look at the DSS, your client base, especially when you compare India versus, let's say, rest of the world, especially the European or the US countries. Most of the times, I believe that the companies who might reach out to you for providing, getting some kind of services, especially in India, would be more of when they have red flags in their systems, versus what are your thoughts, like, or what are your observations in terms of your European customer base or the North American customer base? Do they come to you for a kind of a proactive way? I mean, do you see some kind of a cultural shift or a mindset when you compare Indian companies versus the rest of the world?
Well, definitely it depends upon which company to which company you're comparing. We also are fortunate to have good industrial houses who value safety as a high priority. So if you compare them with the companies in Europe or in North America, I would say they are very similar, because the management believes that, we have to make a change and we are committed to make the change.
Which is a good thing to note.
Which is good thing. And we have worked with large industrial houses, and we have found that, they are able to sustain it in over a period of time. What we talk is, if 3 leadership changes happen and if the system is sustained, that means the culture is changed.
Absolutely.
But in the North America and European system, you would find that, there is also external pressures for them to be functional, because sustainability is a very key part of their company profile. It's not just environment, health, safety, long-term sustainability, and there's a social responsibility which is important in those regions.
Right.
And so you find that there is always the benchmarking between one company to the other, and that sort of drives companies to proactively. They don't want to wait for an incident. Number one, there's a commitment. Number two, there is a value for it. Number three is, I would say, there's a pressure, and they work very proactively. So the proactiveness is definitely very high in these other regions of the world.
So Joseph, you articulated very beautifully about, inculcating this culture of safety and regard for environment sustainability. But the reality truly is that, in any society, any economy, when you start small, you have the immediate short-term pressures of building competitiveness. And as you grow is when your compliance, regulation, everything improves. I mean, small entrepreneurs are even willing to look at that only after a certain size. And many a times it's actually with size, there is also more regulatory scrutiny and enforcement, which forces companies to up the act on all this. Now, given that while you say that all this has to be part of culture, there is a cost associated with this. And companies do find it very hard to build in these costs right up front when they have not achieved scale. So how do you what is the framework that smaller companies can really work with to ensure that one fine day they don't wake up to these huge risks which they have to incorporate, and this whole transition process can be step by step, and it's a smoother transition?
Definitely, cost is a factor which people have to consider. But people also, the small enterprises, should consider what is the cost of doing business and for business continuity. As the owner of the company, the person should be able to sleep at home and say, yes, I have a high hazard process. I'm operating with the volatility, with toxic materials. How do I ensure that the plant doesn't blow up? And then my business is at stake. So whether small or big, it always has to start with the mindset about risk management. So what we encourage, or what we typically do, is to tell people to think about risk governance system, where the leadership can look at their small operation and say, where is my highest risk in this particular process? And what is the consequences, unlikely event taking place, this incident taking place, what is the consequences related to that? And then asking this question, how do I mitigate this risk? What actions can I take now? And so it's like a prioritization model, which we would recommend for the small scale and small size industries to look at. It's all basically based on the potential event being happening and putting this company out of business.
Right.
So it's about risk identification, risk prioritization, risk mitigation, and then ensuring what actions they can take today to reduce the risk. Once they do that, then what happens is people start noticing and the culture starts shifting also. So it is not that, there is a different part called safety culture. There's a different part called safety risk. It's all linked together. And once we work on risk, you will normally help people to understand the risk and able to function safely. So it's not about cost. It's all about, business continuity, cost of, operations, of a disruption. That is a huge cost for any business.
Entrepreneurs have this uncanny ability to perceive what can hamper their prospects in the immediate term. And they often trade that for, long-term compromises, because that's not here and now. And, you can tackle the problem when you get to the bridge, sort of a thing. And that's why many things like environment sustainability aspects are still, even today we are happier with our thermal power plants and not probably accelerating as fast as other countries, because the risk perception is smaller. The second thing is, if there is any tangible financial cost that is associated with these things, then that obviously the promoters, entrepreneurs are care for more. So again, going back to this question, is there a hierarchy or evaluation system in terms of how you can think about these risks? What should come now, later? Is there a framework that you have developed?
Yes, we do have a very structured framework for understanding risk and consequences. And we can create scenarios based on the nature of the hazards of operation and look at the consequences and the impact and put it on a scale by which it is very much visible to the owners of the facilities of what are the highest risk in which they are operating today. And should a event happen, what are the consequences going to be, whether it's fatalities, whether it is completely catastrophic failure of the plant, putting them out of business. These predictable models we have developed, and we use it to help companies understand their risk profile and help them go through the transformation process to mitigate those risks.
Joseph, how do you compare the safety, environmental safety, health, all of these, gamut that ESG also constitutes in India versus, say, China and rest of the emerging world, in terms of the rules and regulations that are laid out by the local authorities, and second, in terms of compliance and adherence to those standards, because enforcement levels are also different in different parts of the world.
Right. So if you compare with in China, the things have rapidly changed in these last 5 or 6 years.
Right.
There has been a number of catastrophic incidents impacting lives of people. And as you know, the government structure is very, very authoritative and compliance driven. They have an infrastructure in place to get it implemented. And so I have seen a great emphasis on compliance by the government regulators in China. And it is very punitive for both, for the industry and the compliance officer associated with that industry. So if there is an unfortunate incident in one facility, it is not only the owners of that facility is held accountable, but it is also the regulators associated in that area is also held accountable. So it is a double-edged sword. Mm-hmm. And with that process, they have rapidly moved up the ladder in terms of compliance. And what I've found is in these past few years, they have classified industries into 3 big buckets. One, which says that you guys cannot do anything anymore, so shut it down. So they just shut down those facilities, small scale industries or industries which are not capable to close the gaps versus compliance. The second is, yes, you are allowed to operate conditionally, provided these gaps can be closed. The third is where majority of the multinationals operate, like DuPont has operated, because they have invested for safety right from the beginning, 20 years back, 15 years back, looking ahead into the requirements. They have no issues. They continue to operate. They are encouraged to do more investments.
Sure.
Whereas today, what I find here is basically compliance. Very, very basic compliance. Examples, what we see here is like we require a firefighting system, fire hydrant, sensors, all these are installed, but never maintained.
Right.
It is just there. So it meets the very basic compliance, but the approach that, whether this is required one day and it should be functioning, it is not there. So what you find is it's very compliance driven, very reactive driven, but we also see industries who have taken pride to transform themselves and are also in the leading edge around safety. We see that extent also in India, but it requires a commitment, as I said earlier, to go up that curve of being a sustainable operations in terms of EHS.
My intention is not to ring any alarm bells, but tell me how big a threat can safety and being lackadaisical in terms of sustainability, how big a threat could it be to India's growth story? Especially in chemical test, specialty chemicals, because that's really the booming segment right now.
So I would like to put back two questions to all of us. Why would somebody come to India and what would he look for? Right? Why is somebody coming is because they need an alternate source of supplies, whether specialty chemicals and at lower cost and competitive cost and a stable, sustainable supply chain. This is the basic requirement. And there are political reasons why people are pushing to change the supply chains. Put that aside. The major thing is, as a supply chain manager outside the country would be looking at, need stable operations, stable supply chain, quality should be good and at a competitive cost. Now, EHS, if not done properly, impacts everything. Now, if you look at the recent incident, unfortunate incident of 3 days back, multiple fatalities, whole plant is shut down. Neighboring industries are impacted also. It's just not that one. Now, if I am the supply chain manager sitting outside, what the news would really jar me and say, is my supply chain stable? How am I going to be impacted? Is there going to be a disruption? Is there going to be a business continuity of my business? So for growth for India, very important that we have a safe operations, which gives confidence to the potential buyers of our product that there is an option here and we can trust and we can be sure that there will be business continuity, short-term, long-term, and in no way we will be impacted. So EHS is fundamental and foundational for the growth of specialty chemicals or any export-oriented product in India.
Hardik, one last question from you.
No, I was just thinking, when you look at the pharma intermediate manufacturing, they generally talk about the supply chain transparency and regulatory support requirements as a part of the documentation process. Maybe a thought that we could probably think of EHS compliance as a part of the document as well. I've not seen most of the companies having that formal document process. So any thoughts on that? Because if you look at especially the API intermediate outsourcing piece of it, the supply chain person sitting in the Europe might ask whether you have the right flow diagram, the batch processes are properly done, the route of synthesis is established or not, but nothing on the EHS. So maybe it's a food for thought to probably include that as well.
That's true, but if you have in pharma API industry, they have GMP, right? Good manufacturing practices, and they're audited for it. Right. Why? Because you want to have the high level of quality. Why not for safety?
Absolutely, that's what my question.
Yeah, why not for safety?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you only focus on the good manufacturing, but the people who are working on that, there shouldn't be a EHS checkpoint and checklist which needs to be submitted.
Right.
I'm not sure whether that exists, but probably I've not come across such documents.
I have also not seen it. In the past, I have been involved in some of the work in this industry. I have not seen it either. And this is what have been our recommendation. If the units are working so hard to have good, audit scores related to quality and GMP, why not for safety? Because this is really looking at risk of the people, risk of the asset, and the risk for business.
Great. So any advice you would give to, we have a lot of participants on the call. Any advice would you give to all the emerging companies or the established companies in India? Maybe a few thoughts.
I think it all starts with leadership. So my advice is, as leaders of these companies, where if we have high ambitions or big ambitions to be the global supplier for some of our products out into the Western world and outside market, we need to put safety on priority. And this is good business sense. It is not compliance. It is an investment for the future. It will ensure sustainability. It will position our industry at a different level if we have good EHS practices and sustainability as part of our mission and vision.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. It was a really lively conversation, many new thoughts. Thank you so much. This is definitely a dimension that is very, very critical for the specialty chemicals space. And I'm sure the audience found it really useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity, Mahalakshmi and Hardik.
Thanks a lot, Joseph.
Have a good day.
Thanks, Hardik.
Bye-bye.